Recognizing the member for Richmond South Centre.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and it is a pleasure of mine to be able to stand up and support Bill 2. Of course, before I start, I want to echo many of my colleagues' land acknowledgement that we are on the Lekwungen-speaking territory, specifically the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nation. I thank them for allowing us to live, work, and play on ancestral land. And of course, as a Richmond South Centre MLA, I also want to acknowledge that I'm representing a riding that sits on the Musqueam, Kwalin, Tuasin, Coast Salish people. I also thank them for allowing us to live, work, and play on ancestral land. It's interesting how we're talking about Bill 2, and one reason why I'm very passionate actually stepping up to talk about Bill 2, because I'm speaking from an outsider perspective. As a person of color, of course, we've experienced different forms of racism, different forms of discrimination. And of course, as we grow, work, and learn in this unceded territory, we also experience a certain amount of colonial bias as we start developing our knowledge and awareness. And one thing I do want to emphasize, like there are times that there will be discriminative action against me that I'm not even fully aware. Why am I bringing this topic up? Because the reality is racism, discrimination is complex. And when we're talking about Indigenous history with Canadian history, its depths, its complexity, its bloody history is far more intense than a lot of our racism we address with. And that is the reason why it is extremely important for us to mark a day to truly, concretely, and comprehensively work with British Columbia to acknowledge the importance of truth and reconciliation. I'm going to take a quick step back. Since December 28th last year till now, I personally attended about 49 events, and about 32 of them are about Lunar New Year. And of all those events, there's one thing I try to make sure I do, is I do my land acknowledgement. I'm not saying anything special about what I did, but I want to say the way the community echoed and responded was very reassuring. Because when I first started, some of the event attendees would walk up to me, what do you mean unceded? What do you mean traditional? Are we on Canada? Some of them will even question why I've wasted 15 seconds of my speech, which I usually make only within a minute, talking about land acknowledgement. And they see me doing over and over again. And I want to also take a moment to express my gratitude to colleagues from all sides of this aisle for thanking you that whenever you attend an event and you do provide land acknowledgement, thank you for promoting the awareness. One of the things we often talk about in Richmond, unfortunately, especially Chinese Canadian community, due to language barrier and due to the limited exposure, there's a lot of understanding barriers being created. And we are trying, working to best, especially as MLAs, as a community engagement, to ensure we foster bridges, understanding, and mutual appreciation of the challenges we face in the community. This has been exhibited, as the symptoms can be seen through the voting rate, through the democratic engagement, and sometimes even to have a public debate and feel like they're expressing different wrong messaging because they were receiving wrong information. And that is why it's so important for a public institution to continue to stand up. Now, when we take a look back at our Indigenous history in Canada, we realize the challenges that the Indigenous community are experiencing. And I dare not assume I can even come to close to comprehend the pain, the suffering, and the family brokenness of what residential school has done for many of them. The fact that when you wear an orange shirt to go to school, somebody has a right to take it off you. Why it is so important to have a truth and reconciliation? Because it's a complex situation that takes gradual steps as we move forward. But we must be moving forward as we continue finding a way to truly find the truth and reconcile the challenges we're experiencing. And one reason why I'm so excited by the bill too is I've seen simply by doing land acknowledgement, I now have community group leaders, especially MCs, will give me a call up and say, hey, Henry, I don't really know this, but can you help me do a quick research? What kind of territory am I on? Should I do my land acknowledgement? How do I do my land acknowledgement? This brings up conversations. There's absolutely no one should hold the expectation that we should be able to resolve the truth of reconciliation within a day or two, or within a year, or even within our lifetime. But we must make gradual steps to continue to educate our community and our constituents. And I think having a bill to setting a date, a marker on our calendar, and saying this is how we're going to not forget. I think I'm going to echo my previous colleague from Richmond Stevenson. She made it very clear: every child matters. And when we chose to let things slip past history, we'll forget about impact it has in our community. It is easy to look at 215 and say that's a number of people who passed away. But the reality is that's every child passing away who are lost, will never be able to return home. That's one life and one complex story missing. That's a one family that's broken. And that's one challenge that we will never be able to reconcile. And that's one evil that happened in our Canadian history that if we do not acknowledge, will end up repeating itself again. So I thought I heard something, my apologies. I do want to emphasize why it is so important for us to have September 30th as our Truth and Reconciliation Day, where we should wear our orange shirt. It is not just a public exhibit of where we stand on some kind of moralism. It is not being for us to driven after sensationalism. It is our deep desire as a society, as a community, to tell one another and to tell ourselves as well. We must do whatever it takes to prevent that evil from repeating itself. And we must acknowledge the pain and suffering it has caused, not because there's a number of people who have suffered, but every life matters. And we're talking about every children count. We want them to come home. I want to echo every member within the chamber who have parents or who are grandparents who have kids. Would none of us ever want to see our kids not coming back home. This is not just a thought that I dare not entertain in my head. It is something I dare not break my heart over, because I don't think any one of us can recover from that. That is why I don't want to say I'm glad, but I'm reassured that the government stepped up and with the support from every member across the aisle, that we are placing truth and reconciliation as a priority as we move forward. And again, I will continue to express my gratitude to every member, to every elected official, to share your land acknowledgement, to remind our community this is something we should never forget. I think as MLA in the community, I often walk around the community attending events where we talk about the Holocaust, where we talk about head tax, and of course now we're talking about residential school. All those are historical wrongs, evils, that if we let it slip past, our future generation will be one who are carrying a different form of suffering and pain and impact by it. That's the reason why I'm standing here today, joined by my colleague and supporting Bill 2. I also want to emphasize the fact that it creates bridges to have healthier dialogue. I remember I actually had a really interesting conversation with one of the group talking about anti-racism. And when the event was hosting, the people were talking about the importance of anti-Asian racism. We must stop that. I asked a quick question. How come your group didn't do a land acknowledgement at the beginning? And that didn't happen because they chose not to, but because they were not aware of it. They were not aware, Canada, one of the biggest and most taunting historical wrong is the relationship Canadians have with indigenous community. And that's why we have a truth and reconciliation. It's hard for us to have say, we're talking about supporting one form of anti-hate, and yet we fail to acknowledge another form of anti-hate. And especially our relationship with indigenous community, the historical bloody history, it far exceeds every other form of racism we experience as a community member. So when the organization actually approached me and asked me, okay, what do I do? How should I acknowledge? And what kind of education can we provide? How can we allow truth and reconciliation become a front line of our anti-racism fight in our community, so we can promote inclusivity, engagement, dialogue, and mutual respect? So if there's an argument about whether it should be a holiday, I think we're going the wrong direction. If we're talking about whether or not it's a day off, we're going the wrong direction. I think what it reminds me is when we attended Remembrance Day, where we stood there for 2 minutes, while different organizations wearing uniform marching and reflect their sorrow and memories of our lives lost to defend our democracy. We must also utilize the Truth and Reconciliation Day to remind us the pain and suffering that we are now benefiting from, and therefore we must historically correct so that we can bring back a lot of justice that was lost because it was allowed to be lost. Bill 2, the fact that we're having a holiday here, is saying we will no longer let this kind of memory be lost and be forgotten. It is not something that needs to be in a history book. It is something that needs to be alive. It's something that we need to really listen and really hear the stories of residential school survivors, and to understand the simple fact that the challenge, not just the challenge went through, but the devastating brokerage of the spirit, the devastation of the family, of how families sometimes even not expecting their loved one coming back. When we have a ceremony in Richmond Brickhouse Park where we play 215 shoes on the floor, it's giving us a context, it is giving us a depth, it is giving us an opportunity to experience a glimpse, a simple glimpse of a pain some of the family has went through. Our government, working with all sides of aisle, is really putting this together, and I'm really hopeful that we'll all come together and show support. Show support to this, unfortunately, a minor step of many thousands of steps that we need to take as a community to continue to say we cannot let this memory to slip past by. We must understand the pain everybody went through, and we must prevent this kind of inappropriate evil reoccurring itself in our society. If we truly believing that we are against hate, we must be against all forms of hate. It has been a fascinating journey, including for myself, to went from becoming simply a community member to become an MLA, and then witnessing everybody do land acknowledgement. We talk about unceded and traditional history, territory, where we get to talk about ancestral land. And around the world, there's still a lot of geographical conflict, fighting over identity, jurisdiction, land entitlement. I think for us Canadians, for us British Columbians, for us to truly be able to say we must walk forward with a more of a civilized, modernized view of how to create a stronger dialogue for our community, we have to show our support to this opportunity for Bill 2. So we can come together and say yes, despite how painful, how bloody, and how unfortunate, and how evil the historical residence school has caused the pain in the community, and we can continue to face the challenge direct on. So we can say we will acknowledge the truth objectively before we can able to muster the strength to truly walk through reconciliation. As I speak today to the question period, I hear both sides argument talking about the important truth around reconciliation. It is all built upon an undrop. I'm so glad that we're continuously putting it together, having argument, having debate in this chamber, talking about how can we better the truth and reconciliation. And yet, I do also want to emphasize, and I'm not here pointing finger at anybody, I have here all kind of conversation that makes me wonder, is more education needed? I remember we had here a topic talking about the indigenous relationship with our bill. The people talk about safety for children. That before we can actually pass on any kind of act, we must worry about safety. And yet, as a youth worker, I knew from my experience, the term safety was often how colonial-based organization goes in and remove children from indigenous family, because based on our colonial view, we must believe that's not safe. Instead of saying, what can we do to support a family, we remove the family. Why is it so important for me to have this conversation? It's because we're still learning. I don't believe the member who made that comment did out of disrespect. But I also know I will probably say a lot of things I will regret later on, because due to my lack of understanding. That is why it's so important for us to continue to look forward, look at this historical and learning from this. Again, why are we talking about Bill 2? Bill 2 fundamentally marks a point, remind us this is another step towards the right direction, towards the direction of truth and towards the direction of reconciliation, towards an opportunity that we can actually stop in our busy life and say we need to reflect and think. I think it's easy for us MLAs, it is easy for British Columbians to live our life, work, family, childcare, we're talking about healthcare, we're running after paying for a mortgage. We have a lot of really important and really necessary factors in our community that requires our attention. And that is also the reason why we need to put a pause from time to time, similar to Remembrance Day, to really ask ourselves, what is truth and reconciliation in our opinion? Again, I think I want to just go back again to have a conversation around my colleagues, some of my colleagues' earlier comment, talking about the pain a family has to go through. I sincerely hope that every member across this aisle, every member who is in this chamber, and hopefully other provinces too, will come together and will say, never again. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.